So in all these tools, I was using kind of these weird phrases called TCP and UDP. So what am I talking about exactly? So TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. Again, internet's built on rules and cooperation. Internet protocol is one, transmission control protocol is the other one, TCP/IP. Most packets are going to be TCP packets. The other type of packet we're going to run into is called a UDP, the User Datagram Protocol. And you're saying, Jem, why do I care about any of this stuff? I'm a front engineer, blah, 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 you're handsome. Well, TCP is always going to be the most reliable connection. TCP, actually, I have this on the next slide. TCP has what's called the handshake. So I send a SYN, which is the type of the packet that I'm going to send. It says I'm sending you something. The server is going to say SYN-ACK. I acknowledge your request, and I'm going to send you back. And then I acknowledge that they acknowledged me. And we do this millions and millions and millions and millions of times. TCP is extremely reliable. It was invented because the internet in the early days, and even now, is really unreliable. Remember how it took 20 hops to get to Google? How do we know? Like, who's enforcing that these hops are actually taking place? What if something goes down and we have to reroute? How then does the server know how to talk back to me? Or what if one router is only allowing inbound traffic, but it's not allowing the outbound traffic? How do those responses get back to me? It's all done through the magic of TCP. TCP is like, hey, bro, I'm sending you a file. I'm like, cool, I will receive that file. And the server's like, cool, I'm glad you're going to receive that file. And then it sends me the file. And I can say, hey, I got 90% of that file, but these packets are missing, this chunk of the file is missing. And the server will say, okay, let me resend those. And I will keep resending and retrying until everything is done and the connection is complete. TCP does that for us. It's very reliable. It has a lot of redundancies built in to make sure that the data is getting where it needs to go. And we need it because the internet's complicated. There's a lot of ways it can go sideways. UDP, on the other hand, does not care. UDP is like, hey, you need a file? Catch. If you catch it or not, who knows? It doesn't really care. UDP is a one-way. It's just going to spray data at you. So why does that matter? Why do we use TCP versus UDP? Why do we have these protocols? Well, one, anyone want to take a guess?
Depends on what you're trying to send and whether it needs to respond one after another or it can be kind of assembled after the fact.
Yeah. So the answer there was it depends on what you're trying to send, if it can be reassembled after the fact. Yeah. What else would we use? Why would we care if it's the connection actually made it?
I mean, for something like streaming video, if you receive a frame out of order, you're not going to go back and replay that one frame when it's out of order. So UDP is usually just good for sending real-time type stuff where it doesn't matter if it gets a few drops here and there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. UDP is useful for streaming video and where it doesn't matter if you lose a couple packets along the way. Yes, question, Mark.
UDP is faster, better for real-time data like VoIP and video.
Yeah, exactly right. Something streaming music, streaming video, where, if you lose a couple frames in there, it's not the end of the world. It's totally fine. You ever wonder why your video sometimes gets blurry when you're real-time chatting? That's because it's UDP. UDP is just sending you data with the assumption that, you're probably getting it. Don't really care if you're not. We're just going to keep sending it until you ask it to stop or the connection's closed. Whereas TCP is much slower, but it's much more reliable. You can run video chat over TCP, but because video chat is actually very bandwidth or video streaming or music streaming is very bandwidth intensive, running it over TCP is going to be very expensive and take up a lot more bandwidth than is necessary versus UDP. But if I had, say, a web page, I'm not going to send it over UDP because I need every single one of those bytes to be reassembled in the correct order to make sure my web page comes together. So that's why these two different protocols exist. Different purposes, different complexities. It's a trade-off between the two. And there's something called ICMP, Internet Control Message Protocol. That's built over either TCP or UDP. Generally, we send it over TCP, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a protocol on top of the other ones. That's how ping works. That's how traceroute works. These are just internet control message protocol, just saying like, hey, what time is it? Or hey, are you still there? We're not sending data, it's just checking into the server itself. They don't actually provide any useful information to us itself. More on the network tool side. And then all this happens at a packet level. A packet is the smallest unit of data that can be transferred over a network. Everything, whether it's UDP or TCP, operates running through a packet. We won't go into packets. That was, I don't know, like a few weeks in my computer science education. But we won't go into packets. But packets are really interesting, how they're composed, how they say, hey, I'm going to send you a 10 gigabyte file or something like that. How are those broken down into packets that are really, really tiny chunks of information, sometimes kilobytes, sometimes smaller, bigger? There's a whole protocol and standards for doing that. The fun thing about ICMP, in the early days, there's something called the ping of death, which is, and I'll admit, I was not a good person before. Still not a good person today, but I was less of a good person when I was younger on computers. Maybe it's how I got good at them. But I could spin up my computer, I could ping somebody, because every time I ping someone, they have to respond back with a pong. So ping, pong, ping, pong, ping, pong. I could fire off 1,000 pings, in real life, much more than that. And they have to respond every time. But every time they respond, it's using just a little bit of their CPU. So it was possible in the old days to just ping somebody, get all of your buddies to ping a website and just take it down very easily just using ping, because you're forcing the computer to respond every single time. That's no longer a thing we can deal with, pings of death. Another trick was, even with pings, was I'm going to ping you from my IP address, but I'm going to spoof that header in the packet and say it's actually coming from this address. So I could say ping google.com or something like that. Google's going to respond with a pong to an entirely different IP address. So I can flood a victim or someone I'm trying to go after, trying to take down, and I'm not even doing it. I'm just telling another server to do it. And we actually see we don't see this as much anymore because we have ways of mitigating that. But we see that a lot with unpatched routers, things like that, used for DDoS attacks, where DDoS is a distributed denial of service attack, where we're just flooding a computer. These days, it's most often caused by hacked servers or misconfigured routers somewhere along the way. Okay, we talked about TCP, UDP, the handshake, and all this is courtesy of Cloudflare. Cloudflare has excellent breakdowns of really complex complex networking diagrams, things like that, and they explain it in really plain terms. So check out that link if you want to dive in more. And the internet's built on the TCP/IP standard. We all collectively agree, every single piece of hardware, every single piece of networking equipment agrees on these protocols and putting them all together. And again, fascinating we've come to this consensus without anybody making us do it.